evening, everyone. My name is Danielle. This is Brenna, Logan, and Marwa. Tonight we'll be discussing the 5 most important things about analyzing your audience. The first big question is, who are they? This is going to get this information, you'll need to collect group data. They look beyond the categories and focus on the individuals. These listeners are your primary audience and your secondary audience. Your primary audience can be into 2 groups. It's going to be unknown and familiar. With your unknown, you will want to collect group data. This is an example of this is you're going to want to ask questions that help discover more about your audience. You want to learn demographics such as age, gender. Usually you can ask these questions with the coordinator of the event that you're going to be doing a presentation for. Also, you can learn preferences about your audience. You can ask how they like past presentations or dislike presentations. Good example is 2 or 3 weeks ago when Professor Smallwood asked what we did not like about our presentations that we've had to witness. Also, we can always keep learning. Even up until the moment that you do the presentation, I've noticed when I come up here to seminars with Ernst & Young or Deloitte, they come in probably an hour and a half, an hour before the actual presentation and talk to the people that are coming, their audience beforehand, shaking hands, seeing what's going on in their day-to-day life. It kind of helps them assess how to talk to that demographic. Now, to talk to an audience that is familiar, that will be us as our classmates or your coworkers that you have to present to. You want to analyze those people's tendencies. So, for instance, I have a monthly meeting every month, and I know exactly how my boss wants information. She says she wants it only on that day, but that is a lie. She wants it all the way up to it, and then she just wants a recap so that she doesn't feel like she's been in the dark the whole month before the meeting. Another one is to ask about their needs. This can partake in more of your classmates individually or your coworkers. I will go to my coworkers individually and ask them, where are you at on your project? What does your project list look like? Because I don't want to end up having to throw someone under the bus because I misspoke about a project that I'm supposed to be working on with another person and they didn't hold up their end. You want to make sure that you are a team player in that aspect. Also, another one is to consider using an opinion survey. This doesn't mean making up 5 questions, making up a whole survey, handing it out. You can take a verbal opinion. Once again, you go to your classmates, go to your coworkers, talk about various ideas that could benefit or help the situation out better, and just gauge their feelings, their emotions, their nonverbal cues about it that will help you explain the situation better in a meeting or a presentation. Now I will present it to Logan about what do they know.
All right, so what do they know? How do we find out what the audience knows? It's pretty simple. We ask them. You start by opening your presentation with questions before you've even presented any of the material to gauge how familiar your audience is and what they know about the subject or topic that you may be discussing during your presentation. And you also want to list any important lingo or jargon up front in the presentation so that whenever these words specific to your career field, whenever they come up, your audience isn't lost and they have a reference to look towards. So you can create some type of handout that will help them during your presentation so they don't become confused. So the next time you lead a meeting, be knowledgeable and point out the knowledge gap if you're working with a large, diverse group of people. And you know which slides to put some emphasis into because you asked them beforehand or what their questions may be. And then you also want to get the experts involved and bounce questions off of them and ask them their opinions on the matter. And you also want to have background materials prepared, such as a glossary, so that people can refer to it anytime during your presentation so that they're not lost, and if they do, they can find out where they got lost and how they can catch back up. And by doing this, it will help your presentation really flow. Now I'm going to pass it off to Marwa to talk about what they feel.
Now, what do they feel? In order, first of all, you have to gauge their emotions of your audience by remembering the strength of negative emotion. Guess people's fears. By doing this, you sharpen their focus and you narrow their views. Know their emotions and emotions of others. Build up positive emotions by motivating them to take new challenges Change the tone of voice to convey emotion and appeal. Determine the probable bias by thinking of an objective and evaluate the request through simple and major requests. Tell people what they can benefit from the presentation, but don't be too demanding. Analyze their bias through positive or neutral by reinforcing the importance of your presentation, and the negative by improving your credibility. An example of this would be through emotional appeal. By sharing a compelling story, you're sure to motivate and inspire. Tell them a life story of yourself and to catch the audience's attention. Hit close to home by correlating to the hungry or poor. You can establish a better audience connection that way. Next, I'll pass it on to Brenna.
Thanks. So, first of all, who are you guys? Well, from what we know, you're a UTD student taking classes in the evening, which we could assume you probably have full-time work or other work obligations during the day that keep you here in the evening. That says to us that you're ambitious, you're committed to your education, you need to sacrifice what you need to sacrifice to get your education completed. And you're not only at UTD, but you're at the School of Management. That says alone that you have perseverance. We're all here, we all know what we have to go through, and it's sometimes just very frustrating, but we all know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And you're in this specific class, so presentations are unavoidable. We know that. So what we want to do, we want to take all these things, blend them together, consider our results, and determine our approach. See what we did there? We're going to learn our ABCs. So I'm going to talk to you about what's going to persuade you guys. There's various approaches, but for A, we're going to talk about accessing various appeals. Diverse people like you require diverse approaches. And there's so many approaches that you can take for different kinds of crowds of people, but for you guys, we're going to break it down into about 5 or 6. There's a data-driven approach, which your crowd would usually tend to be logical, results-driven, like numbers, and the effectiveness really depends on the credibility of your content, of your presentation, rather than you as a speaker. You want to make sure whenever you're including data that your data is reliable. Know your source and share your source. That could definitely help out your credibility. We're going to talk a lot about credibility. Assumptions. Don't ever make assumptions when you're sharing data with your audience. If you're sharing, for example, a survey, you want to make sure that the audience is very aware of how the survey was administered and under which conditions. And distorting the findings will hurt your credibility. So you always want to portray your numbers accurately. Don't conveniently delete out the skewed data. I know it's an ugly dot at the top of your chart, but it definitely will hurt you in the long run. So let's take a look at real quick. This graph shows a mountain range, and it's titled, "Is this mountain range affecting the murder rate in New York?" What do y'all think? Is that going to help or hinder your credibility as a speaker if you try to present this as a mountain range legitimately affecting a murder rate? All right, so you also can use benchmarking. A lot of corporations use this as a technique for, say, a compensation analysis. What you're doing is taking similar industries and seeing where you are and where you compare with them. So, for example, if you wanted to take a customer service representative in one industry, could be completely different, require different expertise and skills than a totally different industry. So you really have to look at where you stand compared to other industries like you. Another approach would be consistency reminders. So if you're presenting something to a CEO that's very adamant about his core values, he feels the company's very influenced by the core values. Maybe you could align your proposal to seem more appeasing to the values themselves. So if you relate something to what he finds familiar or comfortable, you have a way better chance of him going with what you're trying to say. Also, if you're presenting to an audience that you already know is resistant to change, you can propose the idea or state the idea as more of a continued efforts rather than new ideas altogether. So people just kind of start to go with what you're saying rather than thinking they're completely new and they automatically resist it. Another thing is the last part of the A is identify bright spots. This is a good approach for if you have a really big proposal, you're asking for a lot, you know you are. Just focus on the little successes rather than a big problem. So an example is there's a food pantry called Minnie's Food Pantry in Plano, and their slogan is if you can't feed 100, feed just one. So what they're saying is like $1 feeds 25 people. So if you can't, you can't see yourself feeding 100 families or whatever, you can just feed one. So it's little successes. So for B, we're going to build support with benefit statements. With anything that you're proposing, if it's a product or a service, if you outline the features, identify what they are with your audience. The more you know about your audience, the better your audience filter would be. So you would use both of these to identify the benefits to the audience specifically. So using this presentation as an example, some of the features may include you've got 4 speakers from diverse backgrounds and experience, and you have a nice visually pretty PowerPoint presentation, and there's a fun interactive quiz at the end. So there's definitely things about this presentation you might not even be listening yet, but now you heard there's a quiz, so there's a benefit to you right now. You need to listen. So some of these could be turned into a benefit statement for you specifically. You all are students here to learn business topics specifically, and you're all prospects for career advancement, hopefully. So you probably will face this exact challenge to present an idea to a group, and these are just the basic tools that if you had them, you might stand a better chance. So we're going to speed it up real quick. C, for credibility, consider your credibility. You can break it into 2 areas. It can mean different things to different audiences. You want to think about competence credibility and character credibility. So briefly, competence credibility, this audience tends to be, like we said, the data-driven, logistics, they like numbers. So they're more likely to be swayed by appeals to your content rather than the speakers or the credentials of the speakers. In these cases, you want to make sure you establish your authority early. So you want to make sure they learn somehow that you're a doctor, you're a specialist, you're a scientist, you're an analyst for that specific field, whatever you're discussing. You want to make sure that they know that right off the bat, and that will tune them in rather than just being like me trying to talk about cancer treatment. Well, that's what field I'm in, so that doesn't really make sense, but you know what I mean. However, you don't ever want to emphasize your credentials. That can backfire. That can be annoying. So just keep it toned down, but make sure that you establish it right off the bat. So character credentials, people tend to say yes more to those who they like. So for your perception of us right now, it may be more powerful than what we're actually discussing. But like I said, I already gave you a hint, a benefit to you, that there's a quiz coming in. So finding similarity, common ground, we're all students. You know that about me. I know that about you. We've got common ground established. We've all probably got at least some work experience, so I can probably guess that you're going to present a presentation at some point in this class this semester. The last one for D, determine how to reach the decision makers. If you're fortunate, you will already know who has influence with the group, like a professor. Decision makers have direct power or influence, and knowing their preferences ahead of time can improve your outcome. What questions they tend to ask, for example, does your boss tend to ask, what are our competitors doing? Then benchmarking will be the best approach. If you're getting lots of questions on charts and graphs, then maybe a data-driven approach would be best. Regardless, always pay attention to who are your decision makers, who is your audience, what do they know, and how can we wrap the whole presentation around that? Decision makers, decision makers, decision makers.
Will one of you please read the quiz questions out loud so I can get it on the camera?
What is another example of how to analyze unknown primary audience that was not discussed in the presentation? This will be your short answer one, must be minimum 3 sentences. The does or does not boost your credibility as a speaker. You should list any lingo, jargon before or after the presentation. In tonight's presentation,